Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to have the room full of people and also people online. Thank you. My name's Deborah Dean, and I'm a member of the Humanities Committee of the Institute of Learning in Retirement, ILR. Welcome to this summer's Adventures in Living, a series of 6 presentations by our fellow Oak Hammock residents. I'd like to publicly thank Diane Haynes, a fellow committee member, for organizing this semester's all-star lineup. Rick Gold, and we're going to see part 2, Jim Wilshire, Marilyn Hutchinson, Ann Myers, Keith Berg, and Carl Schwartz. Their stories of their early lives, accomplishments, and maybe misadventures will surprise and delight you. And we all need to thank Dick Martin, our videographer without parallel, for his patience and creativity in bringing us these presentations. Our first presenter today is Rick Gold. Rick is chairman of the ILR Curriculum Committee, who organizes all our yearly programs. It's a big job. Thank you, Rick. Those of you who were here last summer will remember Rick's first account of his earlier years of worldwide outreach. Today, we'll see the second part of his presentation, Fighting for Government and Institutional Accountability Worldwide. So as they say in the movies, roll them.
Thanks so much, Debbie. I wanted to tell you that last year I was able to share with you a lot of my background with working with the U.S. Agency for International Development and the 7 countries that I lived in and the dozens of countries that I visited. This year, I'm going to be focusing more on my social justice work. And I promise you I won't provide you with another 10 minutes of the Ethiopian famine, so you can avoid that. The way I wanted to organize it was to show you about half of my program from last year, and then go on and show you the additional activities I did beyond my university level, particularly dealing with social justice. So let me start by sharing the screen. And I think you'll have an introduction from me, by Debbie from last year.
Good morning, everyone, both here and on Zoom. We're so glad that Rick's wife and his brother are able to join us on Zoom. It's a real treat for them, and I said maybe his brother anyway, will have some surprises. These adventures in living are surprising and very rewarding, so I hope you'll enjoy this one today. It's Rick Gold, who moved to Gainesville in 2014, along with his wife, daughter, son, and dog. One of his objectives in moving here was to participate in the Institute in Learning in Retirement, the ILR. In addition to facilitating several courses, attending dozens of them, and asking hundreds of questions, he's a member of the ILR board. He's also the chair of the Curriculum Committee, which is responsible for organizing the ILR courses. And I can testify as a member of the Humanities Curriculum Committee that sometimes Rick's task is like herding cats, but he accomplishes it with quiet skill and tact. Thank you, Rick.
Thanks for coming. So several years ago, I was at the Smithsonian Folklife Festival in Washington, D.C., and there was an exhibit section dealing with Peace Corps volunteers. And they put on presentations about their lives and their work in different countries. And I went up to one of them and I said, when you're with your friends and family, how long can they listen to your stories about what you did in the Peace Corps? He said, maximum 5 minutes. So I'm going to be speaking to you for a bit more than 5 minutes today about countries that some of you are quite unfamiliar with, but I think that you're going to appreciate being informed, inspired, and perhaps even provoked. So there are many sides to my life. I wanted to share with you how my commitment to social justice and holding institutions accountable developed and how it was reflected in my work and activism. We're going to start before I was born. I was born in Baltimore, and Baltimore is a city that was a victim of redlining. And redlining, that many of you know, is a process where the banks decide who's going to live where, depending upon the so-called desirability of neighborhoods. And so it was in the 1930s, and this is a map of Baltimore 1937, where the Homeowners Loan Corporation instituted redlining, and it denied investment in neighborhoods that were so-called high risk. But this risk was based generally on race and ethnicity. And members of minority groups were unable to secure housing loans outside of specific neighborhoods. And that basically determined how Baltimore was broken up, black, white, and different groups. And it also determined where the Jewish community lived. And so I grew up in an almost 100% Jewish community in the Pikesville area, northwest of Baltimore. That was because of redlining. In addition, there was Jim Crow. There were Jim Crow laws on the books that made it quite difficult for blacks to live in the area. Schools were segregated in the 40s. Interracial marriage was illegal. Playgrounds, public parks, swimming pools, and other recreational facilities were segregated. And blacks couldn't be firefighters, taxi cab drivers, or city bus drivers. But by the end of 1955, after Brown versus Board of Education went through at the Supreme Court, Jim Crow was sort of not as pervasive as it was. There were desegregated schools. Many of the pharmacies' lunch counters were desegregated. But department stores still were segregated, as well as restaurants, movie theaters, and hotels. A public accommodations law was passed in 1962, which made Jim Crow illegal. And incredible activism, sit-ins, protests, really contributed to this. There also were many, many years of lobbying by groups like the NAACP, the Urban League, religious leaders, labor leaders, etc. And so that's kind of what I grew up in. Tell you a little bit about my family. This is my mother and father when they were at my wedding in Morocco in 1992. My mother was a specialist in dyslexia. She had a PhD in education. She taught in Baltimore inner city schools for a while. She was a professor of English at the Community College of Baltimore, where she taught African American literature, women's literature, as well as remedial reading for college students. And she also was a teacher at a Reformed Jewish congregation, Baltimore Hebrew, where I was brought up. My father was a tax lawyer at the Internal Revenue Service, and he had some notable accomplishments. First of all, he helped prevent the Church of Scientology from regaining its tax-exempt status, which had been removed in 1967. That didn't last. Through dirty tricks, they did manage to get it back. In 1975, he volunteered to join President Ford's Presidential Clemency Board, which was set up to heal some of the divisions of the Vietnam War. The board reviewed the cases of over 14,000 persons charged or convicted with draft evasion and desertion. As a result of the work, more than 4 out of 5 applicants received pardons, and less than 10% were denied clemency, and the others received alternative service. My father remarried after the death of my mother with Stella Gold, and she is a forensic handwriting specialist. In addition, she has done consulting for human resource departments at companies. One of her minor claim to fame is that she linked the analysis of handwriting to the Myers-Briggs personality test, and that allows her to determine just through handwriting how reliable an employee might be. And this is my brother Brett. He retired as a tax lawyer, like his father, in New York to pursue an interest in composing and performing jazz music, as well as other things. And here's my family, immediate family, my wife Bushra, my daughter Sarah, my son Adam, and Begans. My wife was a Ministry of Interior employee when I met her in Morocco. And wherever she goes, she's famous for her cooking of not only Moroccan food, but all other types of food. And my daughter Sarah is currently a communication specialist with the International Organization of Migration in Erbil, Iraq, the Kurdish area. My son Adam is an assistant preschool teacher. He's a college student studying early childhood education, and he also is a very strong autism advocate, and he does that through social media, through a very active Instagram account. So a little bit more about Baltimore. There was a segregated amusement park called Gwyn Oak, and there the community fought to desegregate it from 1955 to 1963. All types of people advocated, protested, marched to remove the segregation. But on July 4th, 1963, 283 people were arrested and charged with trespassing outside the park during a protest by those who were outraged over its refusal to admit African Americans. The desegregation, they were successful, and desegregation took place in August 28th, 1963. But the park ended up closing in the early 70s due to destruction by a hurricane. And the carousel today is now found on the National Mall. So if you go to Washington, D.C., that's the Gwyn Oak Carousel. In June 1963, the Central Conference of American Rabbis asked Jewish congregations to make an all-out effort to support civil rights. And one supporter was Baltimore's Interfaith Committee on Human Rights, of which Baltimore Hebrew Congregation's Rabbi Morris Lieberman was an active member. Rabbi Lieberman was one of the many clergy arrested at the protest. When a reporter asked him why he joined other clergy to be arrested, he smiled and said, "I think every American should celebrate the 4th of July." Among the white participants was a woman named Lois Feinblatt and other members of the Civil Rights Committee of Baltimore Hebrew Congregation. She said, "Our Rabbi Morris Lieberman was very active in civil rights, and he encouraged members of the congregation to go. He was a fabulous religious leader who inspired people to get out there and do something, to put Jewish principles into action." A few other people attending this protest were Michael Schwerner, who would go on to join the Freedom Riders and was one of the 3 Congress of Racial Equality civil rights workers killed in Philadelphia, Mississippi by the Ku Klux Klan. Other participants were Jewish activist Arthur Waskow, who's now one of the people who has filed a case against the 15-week abortion ban in Florida because of religious freedom purposes, as well as student for Democratic Society President Todd Gitlin, and both of them are in this, I think I can laser, in this photo here. In addition, there are William Sloan Kaufman over here. Here's a bus where the clergy leaders are being taken to prison. And I ended up, my mother was very committed to the struggle, and the first day that Gwynn Oak desegregated, she brought me there. Gwynn Oak also appears in the 1988 film Hairspray, which is produced and directed by Baltimorean John Waters, who's famed for his black humor films like Pink Flamingos and more mainstream films like Polyester. So this film includes a scene of a civil rights demonstration where the Corny Collins dance show is filmed at the Tilted Acres amusement park, so it's pseudonym for Gwynn Oak, and is based on the protests that took place at Gwynn Oak. And you'll see on the right, the main character, one of the main characters, Divine, a transsexual, as well as her daughter in the film played by Ricky Lake. I don't know why this comes out sideways, but I was a member of the Boy Scouts. I was sponsored by the Baltimore Hebrew Congregation. And one of our scout leaders was named Jacob Beezer, and he was a radar technician on both the Enola Gay, which you see here, and the Boxcar, which dropped the atomic bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he was very proud of what he'd done. He said, "Given the same set of circumstances that existed in 1945, I would not hesitate to take part in another similar mission. I feel no sorrow or remorse for whatever small role I played. I don't want to hear any discussion of morality. War, by its very nature, is immoral. Are you any more dead from an atomic bomb than from a conventional bomb?" And some of his kids put together a foundation after he died to basically share Jake's perspective on the bomb. I didn't feel comfortable with that at all. I thought that civilians didn't need to die in such great numbers. But, it became a very interesting issue as I grew up. In 1968, I was bar mitzvahed, and one of the readings that I had to do with the rebellion of the Israelites against Moses, because they just were sick of being stuck in the desert. And so Rabbi Lieberman, who went to jail for Gwynn Oak, presided over my bar mitzvah. And the statement that I made in the speech was that if I were faced with situations that I found unacceptable, I probably would rebel, but only after studying them for a while. So, as I moved into junior high school, one of the activities I participated in was a demonstration against the Vietnam War. My father signed a slip that said that I could go downtown and join the march. It was a march against paying taxes for the war because Lyndon Johnson had signed a law that added a 7.5% surcharge to income tax bills specifically for the war. So it was right across from the Internal Revenue Service building, and I just thought it was kind of interesting or ironic that I was protesting at the same building where my father was working, and he signed the slip for that so that I could attend. Also, in 9th grade, I was taking a class on physics, and the teacher said, as an assignment, that each of the students must write to a congressperson and ask to share their perspectives or to ask for some action. So I wrote to a congressman asking for a bill that legalizes all types of consensual sex between adults. And when the teacher heard about that, he called me a pervert. In 1970, my parents paid for me to join a trip to Europe. And it was a student group, but it also was the opportunity for a graduate student at Clark University to do a thesis on psychogeography, cognitive mapping. And so as part of that, he asked the students to put together maps of the cities that they visited. And one of the assignments was to put together a map of an ideal city. And so he included this map from me in his thesis. He gave me a pseudonym, David Abrams, but nevertheless, that's me, or that's my map. And during the trip, one night we went to a discotheque and he got very drunk, and extremely politically conservative member of the group decided to tell on him, and so he was asked to leave. But the rest of us decided that we would have a vigil in the tour director's office, and it didn't help, but nevertheless, it was a taste of what was to come. I was in high school. You can see me here. And this is a picture of the Film Society that my brother Brett presided over. In high school, one of my political activities was to stick up for the rights of smokers. I was not a smoker, but I hated going to the bathrooms, and it was with all the smoke there. So I wanted to support them, and I went out and joined a rally of smokers who wanted to get a smoker's lounge. It never happened, but nevertheless. Also in high school, I took a class on writing at a local community college, and I still have this paper I wrote on abortion reform and what would be necessary to legalize abortion. And I'm saying that survival should trump morals, that the Catholic Church is a major blockage for the legalization and of abortion. Teacher didn't like exact my words, but I think she appreciated the fact that I was addressing an important subject. I went on to Brandeis University in Boston. It's a non-sectarian university founded by the Jewish community in 1948 as a haven for those who faced discrimination, couldn't find jobs in other universities. I studied biology. I did a I focused particularly on environmental studies and green lifestyles. In the end, I took a couple of courses on nutrition, and I was very interested in the politics of food, as well as the potential use of food as a political weapon. One of my activities at Brandeis was to join a campaign for the bottle bill. In other words, to getting reimbursement for bottles that are returned for cleaning. This again was unsuccessful. There was some dirty tricks by the bottling company employees, but nevertheless, Massachusetts has a bottle bill today, and so I can take partial credit for that. So this is me as a senior at Brandeis, and one of the activities that the students were particularly concerned about was the support for minority students, and they formed a group called the Student Action Group that listed demands, including Asian Americans in the minority financial aid pool, an end to faculty layoffs, reversing cuts to the program that supported minorities transitioning to Brandeis, et cetera. And so one of the activities was to take over the sociology building, and about 28 people occupied it, and I was one of the people outside who were supporting the protesters. Eventually, they had brought in 28 people who mixed with them so that they all came out. So the authorities couldn't determine who was actually occupying. Also, during college, I participated in a couple of rallies of the People's Bicentennial Commission. And if you notice, they have the same "Don't Tread on Me" symbol as the Tea Party, but there was more of a left focus. Their concept was economic revolution, and so you see, send a message to Wall Street. So I attended the rallies in Concord, Massachusetts, as well as Washington, D.C. Also, I attended I met up with a group that was putting together a walk across the United States that's focusing on disarmament and social justice. So I went on a bus trip from the East Coast to the West Coast, and I found them in St. Louis and joined them. One of the activities they did in St. Louis was they participated in a rally against the closure of a hospital in a Black neighborhood. And also they had a seminar on the conversion of military industry to alternative production. I also went to a training on how to be an activist dealing with food and hunger issues in Washington, D.C. And as part of that, I did an internship at the Friends Committee for National Legislation in Washington, D.C. And then when I went back to Brandeis, I established a group that focused on hunger action. In addition, during the bicentennial year, I protested one of the tall ships that came to Baltimore as a part of the festivities. And this one was from Chile. And the protest was because the ship was used basically as a torture chamber by the Pinochet government in the early 70s. At least 110 political prisoners were interrogated aboard the ship. And so I leafleted outside the ship, and apparently the word is that the FBI investigated some of the protesters against the ship. In addition, at Brandeis, there was a big initiative to disinvest from South Africa. I had a meeting with the president of the school, who went around to apartment for the kids, for the students, to just build relationships. So one of the questions that we asked him was, well, does Brandeis have any investments in companies doing business in South Africa? And he said yes. A couple of weeks later, Angela Davis visited. She was brought in by the student government, and she was a former graduate of Brandeis. And she made a presentation and then asked, "What does anybody know whether Brandeis has investments in South Africa?" And I raised my hand, and that was that, the start of a campaign that lasted for quite a few years. So my next school was the University of Pittsburgh School of Public International Affairs, where I studied international development and rural development. What you see here is a button that refers to Anita Bryant and the fact that she was leading an anti-LGBT campaign in Florida. And so I joined one of the demonstrations that took place in Pittsburgh. Another issue that I dealt with when I was at the university was dealing with a couple of Supreme Court cases. One of them was the Bakke case, and the other one dealt with the Nazis marching in Skokie, Illinois. For the first one, the Bakke case, Supreme Court said that affirmative action should take place at the universities, but quotas were not acceptable. The second one, for the Nazis versus Skokie, it prevented the village of Skokie from forbidding a march by members of the Nazi parties. And Skokie was a heavily Jewish community with Holocaust victims. And I supported both of these decisions and in the school newspaper. So this is my article that I submitted to them. That was very controversial among everybody in the school. So, Okay, I think we're going to move on to the live show. So let me stop sharing that, I guess. And now sharing the PowerPoint. Is that it? Okay, so life continued, and I moved to Arlington, Virginia after graduate school. And one of the organizations that I volunteered with was Amnesty International. And at that time, Amnesty was focusing on political prisoners and writing letters to governments to release them. So I did that to a number of countries. But I also had the opportunity to join Amnesty International when I lived in Senegal in 1981 to 83 and participated with them. And I was their main letter writer in English. And my focus particularly was on writing letters to the governors of states in the US that engaged in capital punishment and writing to ask them to put off killing some of the prisoners. I also participated in a rally against the nuclear power plant in 3 Mile Island that almost disappeared in 1979. There was a large rally in Washington, D.C., and I helped organize by distributing flyers and putting up posters. In 1980, I helped organize a national Jewish politically progressive organization called New Jewish Agenda. And within the Jewish community in the US in the early 20th century, there were many who supported socialism and workers' rights. And so the New Jewish Agenda came out of that general trend, but it also was the forerunner of many Jewish progressive organizations that are around today. And so it was a multi-issue network of politically progressive Jews. And it called for a two-state solution to Israel and Palestine. And it was, in many ways, not well accepted by the Jewish community. So it was a network, and some organizations, some agenda chapters were refused to participation in like Jewish community organizations. I participated in the founding conference, and it was notable because it was attended by I.F. Stone, the political gadfly, the journalist who was quite notorious. I drafted a paper for distribution to the conference, and it was on aid to Israel. And I advocated withholding money equal to that spent by Israel for settlements. This even was controversial among those attending the conference. I participated in the Washington, D.C. chapter afterwards, and one of our activities was supporting the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. And our purpose was to cut off U.S. government funding to the authoritarian and abusive government of El Salvador during the period. Another initiative that we got involved in was organizing a group of rabbis to go down to Nicaragua because the Reagan administration was claiming that the Salvadorian government was anti-Semitic. These rabbis found that that wasn't true, and that at least reduced some of the support for the Reagan administration's involvement in Nicaragua. Another thing that we looked at was we participated in various rallies in Washington, D.C. One of them was the March for Women's Lives and Reproductive Freedom in 1986. And also, we participated in the Soviet Jews Embassy Vigil, which the Jewish community overall supported for many years. And I organized a nationwide hunger network, and you can see the newsletter here. Another thing that New Jewish Agenda participated in was anti-apartheid organizing, and we participated in a vigil at the South African Embassy in 1984. In addition, we helped organize the visit of a rabbi and a reverend of the Black Dutch Reformed Church from South Africa to both Jewish and Christian organizations in Washington, D.C. New Jewish Agenda also was on the forefront of Jewish support for lesbian and gay rights, and this is the second national march on Washington for lesbian and gay rights in 1987. And you can see Congresswoman Pelosi, and she's celebrating the decisions striking the Defense of Marriage Act and allowing marriage equality in California. I also participated in many anti-war protests. In 1991, when I was working in Morocco, I was evacuated for safety reasons during the Gulf War, and came to Washington, and the next day went down to the White House and started protesting against the war. I joined Peace Corps volunteers who were evacuated from all over Africa, North Africa. In addition, in 1991, I organized New Jewish Agenda's participation in a teach-in on the Gulf War. Afterwards, in the follow-up to the 9/11 attack, I participated in various protests against the war in Afghanistan, against the war in Iraq. Over the years, I participated in a number of pride festivals, of LGBTQ pride festivals, both in Washington, D.C., and here you see my two children with the rabbi from our organization, and also in Gainesville. I visited Israel as a student in 1971, and had a feeling that it felt to me like the American South in terms of segregation, the dehumanization of Palestinians and Arabs. And so I had some real questions about US policy regarding Israel. And I've been working since 1980 against occupation and for two states. One of the groups that I was involved in was J Street. And here you see some of the mottos: pro-Israel, pro-peace, pro-democracy, pro-two states, pro-justice, pro-human rights, and pro-Palestinian. In addition, I protested the organization AIPAC, or AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee, which basically was a lobby group for the Israeli government. And so I participated in a number of protests against them. In 2002, I attended an Israel Solidarity rally, but I draped the Israeli flag and the Palestinian flag around me, and drew a bit of comments from some of the participants. Also attended some Palestinian solidarity rallies. In 2011 or so, a development worker named Alan Gross was imprisoned by the Cuban government for trying to set up an internet system in Cuba. And so I helped organize some rallies to liberate him. This is my Jewish congregation rallying in front of the Cuban interest section in Washington, D.C. Eventually, he was released, and if you remember, that was when President Obama liberalized relations with Cuba. Okay, since 1999, I've been involved in the humanistic Judaism movement. And I started out as a member of the Washington, D.C. congregation. It's called Machar, the Washington Congregation for Secular Humanistic Judaism. Humanistic Judaism brings together Jews who are atheists, agnostics, secular humanists, or people who really focus on human affairs rather than God. As in Machar, I was on the board, and I also was the president. And I also became a member of the board, and still a member of the board of the Society for Humanistic Judaism, which provides support to the 25 congregations or so that are in the US and Canada. I was involved in the social action side of the Society for Humanistic Judaism. And one of my roles was to develop resolutions. And so some of these resolutions included denouncing discrimination in foster care, humanitarian policies for undocumented immigrants, condemning the rule that allowed employers to deny birth control to employees, assault rifle and high-capacity magazine ban, and the condemnation of ethnic cleansing in Myanmar. I also worked on social justice in developing a humanistic Judaism community here in Gainesville. We call it the Gainesville Humanistic Judaism Community. And I started that in 2017. Some of the things that we've done are humanistic celebration of Jewish holidays, a celebration of secular Jewish authors, a program on Judaism, socialism, and anti-racism, several programs on separation of church and state and religious freedom, a humanistic approach to death and dying, program on science and religion, gender identity, and sexual ethics. I also was involved in advocacy on secular issues, and including here a photo of me protesting the Hobby Lobby case in front of the Supreme Court. The Hobby Lobby case had to do with the religious freedom rights of the business to deny contraception to their employees by not including it in their health insurance. So the Supreme Court voted to allow businesses to discriminate against employees nevertheless. I also am the board chair of an organization that fights for the rights of Dalits or untouchables and fights caste discrimination. It's called the International Commission for Dalit Rights. As the board chair, I've helped them put together various events, including a rally and march in Washington, D.C. You can see me with the megaphone there. By the way, just for your interest, there's Martin Luther King and the great Indian Dalit leader Ambedkar. The Dalit rights community has some mixed feelings about Gandhi because Gandhi really never stood up against caste discrimination, even though the Constitution of India outlaws untouchability. And here on the right, you'll see me with some members of the organization, Dalit Right Organization. This was actually an event that I thought was quite interesting. It was organized by what they call African-American legacy families, like descendants of Booker T. Washington, Frederick Douglass, and Thomas Jefferson's slaves, and George Washington slaves, Sally Hemings. And it was to express the solidarity between the Black community and the Dalit communities for who they felt were experiencing modern-day slavery. As part of humanistic Judaism activities, I attended a rally, the Science March in Detroit, and just indicating the importance of science and rational thinking. in Gainesville, when Richard Spector, when Richard Spector attended to speak to an audience at the University of Florida, there was some real feeling among university leadership, Jewish community, that you shouldn't go out and protest. But him being a fascist and perhaps even a Nazi, it just seemed to me that it was not the time to stay silent. So I went out. I went along with, I brought my children as well, and we attended the rally against him. It was quite meaningful. In 2018, after the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, I attended the March for Our Lives in Gainesville, and you can see Mayor Poe there. And since 2020, I've been organizing a new group. It's called Florida Jews for Secular Democracy. And it's part of a national group. But we've done a lot of interesting things to fight Christian nationalism and support separation of church and state, particularly in Florida. And these included organizing synagogue panels on separation of church and state, meeting with legislators on issues such as moment of silence, transparency of healthcare institutions, indiscriminating against people based on their religious concerns. We fought against the Don't Say Gay bill and the Stop Woke Act. We also have been supporting the efforts of a rabbi to litigate against the 15-day abortion ban, but based on its religious freedom concerns rather than the concerns of privacy, which we do support, but it also is important to recognize that it's a religious freedom issue. And most recently, we are participating in the petition campaign to put a referendum on abortion rights in the 2024 election. And I've laid out some petitions in the back for you to sign and submit if you'd like. And finally, I wanted to tell you about my work with ILR. And as a leader of the curriculum committee, I've had the ability to help put together some quite interesting classes, and also have led some myself. I facilitate the roundtable along with Dick Suter, who's here, and that's been challenging at times. I also was facilitating and teaching the Great Decision Foreign Policy Discussion Group. I participated in a class dealing with democracy. I helped put together another one on gender and intersectionality. I helped organize a class on LGBTQ rights. And with Richard McMaster, I worked on the World War I in the Middle East course. Last semester, I helped put together the Critical Race Theory and Race and Education course. And right now, I'm working on the course dealing with the 1619 project along with Richard McMaster. So those are some of the activities that I've been involved in social justice. I hope they've inspired you, if not got you angry. So thanks for giving me the second opportunity to share my background and my ideals and my experience. Really appreciate it.
Are there any questions? Are there any questions for Rick?
Or comments. Anybody online?
Hi, Rick. Thank you for your talk and your activism. Are you aware of the Interfaith Alliance for Immigrant Justice Group in Gainesville? And if not, you'll want to talk to Richard McMaster about that. The second thing I want to mention is I was very interested in your activism in El Salvador, because there is an El Salvador family that actually Richard McMaster is sponsoring here in Gainesville. And there are a number of people, including some here in the audience, who are involved in that as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Certainly, immigration is extremely important issue, social justice issue. And even in the early 80s or mid 80s, there were concerns about giving asylum to Salvadorian refugees. And so we participated in that in terms of New Jewish Agenda. And, you know, here in Gainesville, the Gainesville Humanistic Judaism community and the Florida Jews for Secular Democracy consider themselves part of the faith community focusing on social justice and building on some of the work that has been done. For example, I went to Tallahassee just a few weeks ago with various groups, including Catholics for Choice, to lobby for reproductive rights. But immigration is certainly an important issue that we are focusing on.
Rick, that was, to say the least, very inspiring and challenging. And I think that and I think that was Alice Gridley. We also work here in Gainesville, an interfaith group that is dealing with those who are at Baker and McClenny, a prison facility that is used for housing refugees, but asylum keepers or asylum petitioners and others who are locked in the immigration issue very seriously, with family split and all of the things that go with incarceration of people in the process to become either permanent residents or citizens. And it is an interfaith alliance, and I think that is like the immigration group, which Baker is part of it, the Baker group that goes to talk to people who are incarcerated to let them know there is a presence outside their incarcerated walls, that it cares about them. And all of what you said and all of that we just referenced about what's going on here raises a question that has always been on my mind, and I'm sure on yours, that why aren't all of the religions having a humanistic activists together and creating the power that creates to make changes that ought to be done and should have been done a long time ago, to fight for civil rights, to fight for justice. And we tend to fractionalize when we see these issues before us, and you can't miss them. And we try, and you have illustrated how that can be done with your life and with the groups that you've organized within Judaism. And it seems to me, if people understood what religion can do when it gets together and doesn't fight with one another, including killing each other, that we might be able to accomplish some of the progressive things that should be done. And I would be interested in what your perspective is on interfaith, these groups working together. What are the challenges? What are the problems? And what are the promises of having us work together in these communities all over this country, where you can bring to bear the power and the force that interreligious and factionalism can be removed, and we can, be a united humanistic tradition in this country that is religious.
Thanks, Paul. Interfaith groups have been active in social justice for a long time, and there are opportunities. Where they have much in common to be able to work together. But that's not in all cases. For example, working with the Catholic Church on reproductive health is kind of a difficult issue. Not totally. I mean, as I said, we work with Catholics for Choice on reproductive health. There's some real divisions too, particularly with the Christian nationalists, those who believe that this country was founded as a Christian country and its laws should be reflect their version of what Christianity is about. So there are natural divisions, but I think there's potential for real solidarity, not only among religious groups, but also among secular groups. One of the groups that was part of our delegation in Tallahassee was American Atheists. And there's the social justice commitment of both religious and secular groups really overlap in many ways. Gainesville should be proud of its tradition of interfaith social justice. Before I came here, they drove out the church leader who wanted to burn the Koran, and that's been going on for a long time among the religious leaders here.
Anyone else?
Okay, if there are no other comments or questions, thank you all for putting up with me and listening to a second year of my presentation. I really appreciate it.